So guys, today I'm going to do something a little bit different. What I'm going to look at is my 10 favourite contemporary plays. Okay, so obviously contemporary can have a couple of meanings. It can mean living at the same time as, so like contemporary meaning, you know, for instance in my lifetime. In historical terms, often we say contemporary when we mean anything after World War II, but today I just mean things that have been produced since the 90s, since I was born basically. So without further ado, I'll get cracking. So number 10 on my list is Bluebird by Simon Stephens. One of the first plays he ever wrote, certainly one of the first major ones where he kind of got a breakthrough. These collections of plays, by the way, are very good if you're into particular playwrights and you want to get to know a little bit more and you want to see like how they vary in terms of their style. Simon Stephens, I actually could have picked about 4 or 5 different plays of his that would have been on this list. However, there's just something about Bluebird, the emotional journey of the main character who leaves his wife and doesn't see her for about 10 years, and then when he does see her, there's like this really emotionally charged meeting between them because I don't want to spoil it, but just read yourself Bluebird. It's closer towards the social realism stuff he does rather than the other bits and pieces. So yeah, that's number 10 on my list. Number 9. So again, I've got another collection of plays. However, the one I want to talk to you particularly about is called The Whiskey Taster by James Graham. That's number 9 on my list. This is a great play. It's about the advertising industry and a man and a woman who work together who ostensibly have complex feelings towards each other. The person who is the male protagonist of the two, he has synesthesia, so he experiences things and it invokes certain colours, certain flavours, and it's just a really intriguing journey of the characters who are involved. There's this charismatic whiskey taster who comes along as well, who's inspired by a book by Ian Banks. So I would definitely recommend James Graham's The Whiskey Taster as my number 9. Number 8. Okay, I couldn't have not had Lynn Nottage on my list. This is Ruined. So it's all about a incredibly charismatic matriarch in a war-torn country who essentially has a harem, I suppose. She entertains soldiers who come along and she puts her neck on the line for them sometimes because she's quite sentimental, and she ends up being, as she would say, ruined. Something quite violent happens to her. But there's just so much empathy for the characters in here, so intriguing, and just you can't not love the main character. And it is a tragedy, but it's one of the best contemporary plays that I've read. Number 7 on my list, Debbie Tucker Green. So we've just had Lynn Nottage, who's a Black American playwright. Debbie Tucker Green is a Black British playwright who's incredibly powerful. A lot of her works are quite poetic. She manages to find the rhythm in the way that people speak. Not to say that it's realistic. It's definitely manipulated, definitely heightened. You know, maybe some influenced by Pinter or something, where you know it's rhythm that she's really, really interested in. Of all her plays, I would say that Random was the most complete. It feels like it has the most satisfying journey. But if you want to explore a really poetic dramatist, then you can't go wrong with you know Nut, If, I, loads of her stuff. Great. So number 6. This time, God of Carnage by Yasmina Reza, also adapted into a film called Carnage by a quite provocative director. I'm not going to go into Roman Polanski and his background, but yeah, the actual play itself that was translated into English by Christopher Hampton, because Yasmina Reza is French, is one of the most intense sort of characters stuck in one room kind of plays that I have come across. It has a lot of realism and a lot of sort of critique of middle class values, and she has some other great plays. I mean, art is a great audiobook that has Brian Cox in it. So if you're into listening to audible versions of plays, I would recommend that too. Okay, now we're halfway through the list. We're starting to get to the really meaty stuff. So it was actually really hard to narrow down like what my favourite plays were. There's so many great contemporary playwrights. It seems like since the 90s there's just been this real explosion of talent and so many great writers. But number 5 had to be Annie Baker's The Aliens. Okay, so The Aliens actually draws its title from a Charles Bukowski poem. So Annie Baker is an American playwright, but she just manages to capture the almost like hopelessness of this lost generation of characters who are really struggling and taking drugs as a sort of coping mechanism. They produce music together, but really they just sit and chill in a cafe, and it's in some ways quite a slow play, but it just captures the realism of how people talk in a way that I haven't seen any other person do so well. There's lots of silences and pauses and incomplete thoughts that you can kind of see what the characters are thinking without them really declaring it. It's very subtle and so full of subtext. Yeah, again, Annie Baker is just so talented. It's ridiculous. Great. So the next play on the list is called Cock Like a Male Chicken. And yeah, essentially the story is about a bisexual male who is in an estranged relationship with his male partner. He meets a woman and sleeps with her, and he doesn't know what he wants to do. Does he want to stay in his unhappy relationship with his male partner? Does he want to live a stereotypically normal as he would see it lifestyle where he's able to have a wife and kids? Like what is it he wants? There's actually this really powerful moment as well where he thinks of himself as like a drawing that hasn't been coloured in, yeah, I mean, although some people interpreted it as it's encouraging the whole bisexual as a greedy trope as a negative. I think that is quite reductive, but Mike Bartlett, the author, is brilliant, and his stuff on TV, Dr. Foster, whatever Bull got called, Sticks and Stones, that was it, when it was adapted for TV. He's really talented too. Great, so final 3. So things got even harder now. These 3 could have gone in any order, and these 3 plays are just so good, such strong favourites, and widely acclaimed to be brilliant plays. We have Jerusalem by Jez Butterworth at number 3. So about essentially this traveller character who is again very charismatic but quite complicated. He's perhaps a little bit sexist, and he's sort of trapped in this idealised version of manhood in the past, and he's refused to sort of move on with his life. So it kind of in some ways feels like a tragedy as they're trying to move him off his land, and yet he's belonged here, he's always been here. And yeah, played by the wonderful Mark Rylance, who is actually going to be reprising the role in April, which would be exciting to see because I missed it last time. But yeah, great. So that's number 3. Number 2, Philip Ridley. So of all the writers in my list, I would say that Philip Ridley, in terms of contemporary playwrights, I mean, there's some classic ones who've influenced me a lot. He's the one who's probably had the most influence on how I write when I personally try and do stuff for the amateur theatre. There's just something about it which is beyond realism, something which is quite strange and uncanny. It's almost more like the feeling of a nightmare more than reality. And he talks actually in one of his interviews about having this super saturated feeling, or that one of the critics described him as Dessard in Versace, and he took it as a compliment, although it probably wasn't intended to be. So yeah, the Pitchfork Disney, combining these 2 ideas of something for children Disney, because the characters are trapped in this childlike state, and a pitchfork, you know, this nightmarish thing, and they become this character in the protagonist's mind who is a closeted gay man trapped in his childhood because his parents abandoned him and his sister. But I would very much recommend anything by Philip Ridley. He's very much like a love it or hate it kind of person. You'll probably know from just a few pages if this is going to be one of your favourite writers of all time, or if this is going to be something that's just not your jam, and that's fine. So, drum roll, my number one. Actually, we'll sidetrack slightly. I'm going to talk about some honourable mentions. So, I'm in the process of moving house. I actually couldn't find one of the ones that I was likely to put on my list, which is Brilliant Adventures by Alistair McDowell, which involves a junkie and a council estate and a time machine, and it is absolutely wonderful, just like X and lots of his other stuff. Otherwise, it probably would have been in my top 10, to be fair. Dealer's Choice by Patrick Marber, about gambling. It's a great play. Death and the Maiden, sort of Pinteresque, but set in South America. Normal, about a psychopath by Anthony Nilsson. In a Dark, Dark House, which is the story of some childhood trauma about someone who's sort of abused in the family. And Dealing with Claire by Martin Crimp, which is just sort of classic dark comedy in the theatrical sense. You know, some unsettling stranger comes along and is, you know, very menacing from the beginning. But yeah, things sort of escalate from there. So now I've talked about some of the honourable mentions. Number one is The Pillowman by Martin McDonagh. So I'm not sure about any of the other people who'll be watching this, but my first experiences of storytelling were actually all fairy tales. That's some of my earliest memories from being a child is my parents reading to me. It's very much connected with my experience of reading. So in fact, those Coloured Fairy books by Andrew Lang was you know, some of the first things that I've read, and I listened to the audiobooks, and I still really enjoy them. So to see such an interesting brand new fairy tale that's so dark, The Pillowman, the premise being that this is a character who appears to people who will live a life of trauma and can go back in time and basically prevent them from living that horrible life, and hence, you know, his name, The Pillowman. But it's incredibly dark, and it riffs on lots of popular fairy tales, from the story of the Pied Piper to some other ones, and is so full of dark humour, and you can just be like laughing one moment and then it's so tragic the next. And Martin McDonagh, I mean, obviously, you know, his films In Bruges and Three Billboards, Seven Psychopaths are all really popular, but I really do hope that he carries on writing for the theatre, because yeah, his dialogue is brilliant, and yeah, it would be a loss if he didn't write any more for them. So yeah, that's it. That's everything. I hope you enjoyed my top 10 plus the honourable mentions there. If you've got any favourite contemporary plays, so anything from the 90s that are your favourites, feel free to share down below in the comments. And that's everything. Cheers.